folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin, eclectic album reviews and general musical meanderings. I got another 4 albums for you as part of this ongoing, very methodical overview of all the new music I've been subjecting myself to for the first 6 weeks of the year. Got a couple more weeks of this before we start looking at things a little more closely, but for now, let's go ahead and get started. First one up I got is Weyes, Blood, and In Darkness, Hearts Aglow. This album is a second in a trilogy, apparently. The previous album, Titanic Rising, got a lot of really high critical attention when it came out a few years ago, and I love that album. And like its predecessor, And In Darkness, Hearts Aglow has this impossibly lush soundscape to it that definitely refers back to the fullness of the best 70s production. And in that way, it has a real nostalgic feel to it. I mean, many people draw a pretty straight line between what Weyes Blood is doing here and Karen Carpenter. It'd be interesting to see what would happen if Karen Carpenter had a longer career. It would probably lead to some stuff like this. I kind of like to think of it as what would happen if Amy Mann and Burt Bacharach did a collaborative album.
It's not just me, it's
even though it's immediately nostalgic, the topics on this album are also very immediate. The general idea behind these trilogy of albums that Weyes Blood is working on, I believe, is a commentary on the current condition and how like the world is crumbling, but still there's this kind of sense that the isolation that we feel is a thing that we have in common. So it's a weird paradox, and I think that she tackles that very admirably, but not obviously. I think in some ways this album might not be quite as immediate as Titanic Rising. I remember when I listened to Titanic Rising, I hooked onto it quickly, and this one has taken more listens to kind of delve into. But I still think it's a pretty amazing chunk of art rock that shouldn't be overlooked. Next up I got Ziemba's True Romantic. Usually I take great joy in sort of putting really random things up beside each other, like Frank Sinatra right beside a death metal group. But in this case, this is a situation where if you liked Weyes Blood, you probably will also key into what Ziemba is doing on True Romantic. And although it's not quite as lush in terms of its orchestration as the Weyes Blood album is, a bit more stripped down, it's still very, very imaginative, and I think it has more in common with that album than not. And somewhere along the line, I had heard somebody compare her to almost like mid-period David Bowie. And given David Bowie's history and his kind of mercurial nature, that's a very broad brush to use to describe something. But there is something about her melodic sense, and especially Bowie and his more stripped down work, that I think is not a bad reference point for this music. Like Weyes Blood, Ziemba kind of leans into cliches, maybe a little bit even harder to a degree, but I think that she travels through those cliches to really make something make a really good point, because many of these songs are very kind of about old-fashioned types of idealized types of love, but in truth the delivery is so heartfelt that I think that it sells in the end. Okay, next up I got The Meters' Rejuvenation. Now we're back to something a little bit more off the beaten track from where we were before. I got into The Meters' Look at Pie a few years ago, and unfortunately that album kind of got lost in the shuffle, and it's one that has garnered more listenings to me since the time that I was initially first listening to it. And I wanted to get more Meters into my diet, more or less. So I got this album. It's pretty highly suggested, and there are some really great tracks on this one. One of the things I really loved about Look at Pie was the fact that it was an instrumental album. It really lets you see the magic of what the Meters were doing, and particularly in terms of their groove that they use and their very specific kind of musicianship, their very specific kind of virtuosity. This album has vocals on it, and to a degree that detracts a little bit from, I think, what was really great about Look at Pie. But you peel back those layers a little bit. One of the very first times I ever checked out the Meters was on Harry Connick's She album. And they were basically his backing band. And there was such great work that happened on that album. It always made me curious about going back and checking them out. And that's the band that I hear here.
Wonderland now, children. I wanna go. I want to get up and go. But that land, fame. Africa, oh Africa.
I hear this kind of virtuosity most distinctly on the extended tune "It Ain't No Use," because here you have a tune where it breaks off into more of an open-ended jam, and there's not a section here where you have really extended, obvious soloing, but instead you hear this groove get laid down, and then it slowly evolves. Like there's no point at which they really take a really hard left turn and turn their groove into something different. They change a thing here and they change a thing there, and over the course of 11 minutes it mutates into something amazing and wonderful. And finally I got Tito Carillo's Urbanessence. Now, Tito Carillo was a friend of mine in high school. Back when we were both in band together, I was playing trombone, he's a trumpet player, and I remember him as this I was a junior whenever he was a freshman, and I remember him as this kid that came in and figured out the trumpet solo for Louie Louie, and at the games it always played. It was super impressive. And on top of being a great player, he's always a super duper nice guy. He has gone on to become a jazz professor in Chicago and has released a couple of albums. This is the second one. And the inspiration for this album is sort of this idealized concept of the city, of the urban life. And he found a lot of inspiration in thinking about, the benefits and the beauty of city life. And this is what kind of fueled the compositions on this album. I think this is a great example of a contemporary jazz album. Slight on the Latin jazz side, but man, Tito sounds great in it. His band is awesome, and I think you could do a lot worse as far as contemporary jazz goes than to check this album out. Okay, that's all I got for you guys this time around. So please, if you like this video, like and subscribe and share it with your friends. Also follow me over on Spotify. I'm making this list that's 2023 albums. And I've also got a Patreon page where you can go over and get a subscription to the viewers bracket. I'd like to welcome Barbara Kramer to that list. She'll be in 2 or 3 weeks start to get eliminations on her own. I'm going to run a parallel bracket with her and the other viewers and see how close we get at the end of the year. The top 20 viewers list might be entirely different from my own. And I think that's great because all this music is awesome. I'd like to see them get represented. So if you're interested, please run over to the Patreon page and check that out. And until I see you next time, I'll catch you on the flip side.